Hello, I am Enrique Barra, and in this video we will see the components and data flow in React. In the first place, remember the three main characteristics of React that were the virtual DOM, the event flow, the one-way data binding, and the components. We are going to see now these components and the one-way data binding. Well, what are components? In an abstract way, a component is just each part of our user interface. So, it does only one thing. We will have to divide our application into components, into different pieces, and we will have to codify them in React. The component receives some data and returns the user interface to be rendered. It is easy and simple like that. So, the components will let us split the user interface into independent reusable pieces and think about them in isolation, so independently. They won't interact with each other. This is where the web is going because it lets your application grow, it will scale with your application, and it will be able to be reusable among different parts and pages of your application. Because also in JavaScript it is very easy to create spaghetti code and to mix everything with everything and different parts, modify other parts. It is very complex, so as an application grows, this part gets very important. Well, as a first step, then we will have to divide our application into components. For example, a shopping list that we have defined like this, we can, for example, keep the name outside in an H1 or in another HTML and divide the rest of the application into components. The main component will be the blue box here, that is the app. Then we can find a text input, then a shopping list, and inside the shopping list different items. And the shopping list component will be reused in the already booked component. This is the shopping list also, then with two items. Let's see as a tree. We have the application here, the text input, and two instances of the shopping list. The first one with 3 items and the second one with 2 items. Okay? So we see here that the item component will be used in this case 5 times, but as the user goes and writes on the text input, there will be more and more items. Or for example, if the user closes with the X one item, there will be less items, and we will use more or less of this component. How do we define a component in React? Well, it is very easy, because it's just a JavaScript function or an ESS6 class. It just has to return what will be rendered. Remember the definition. So, in a JavaScript function, we return h1, for example here, with some content, depending on the props. And as a class, it has a render method that will return, in this case also, an h1 with the props. Okay? Remember that the props are just the input, the params that they received. So the component is just a function or a class that receives some data and returns what has to be rendered. What are the main characteristics of these components? They have very high cohesivity. Okay? They are correlated, they belong to the same app, but at the same time they have loose coupling, because if we modify one component, we don't have to modify the rest of the app, because they have an API that are these props that they receive. For example, in our example of a shopping list, if we will modify one item to be rendered other way, we don't have to modify the rest of the app, because what the item receives is what they have to render, and for example, if the buttons are disabled. They are very easy to test, so welcome back unit testing. They are declarative, and they will be written in JSX. That is an extension of JavaScript. Remember, very important, that they are not templates, because they have an API, and we will see they have multiple methods. At least they have to return what has to be rendered, or to have a render method, but in the end they will be able to have multiple methods. how is my first component? Let's see one example as a class here. My app component will return a div with an h1 with some text and with a h2 with the props that the component has received. And how do we render this component? Well, we have a library that is called React DOM that has a method render that receives the component to render and it passes the params that it needs. In this case, subtitle, second line. So, what is happening here with this code? Well, we call this render method with this component. So, React calls the app component with this param that is called, as I said, prop. So, the app component will render and substitute here in the h2 the props second line, and React DOM will efficiently update the DOM. How? With this virtual DOM that React has in memory. Okay? As a convention, our components will start by a capital letter and the standard HTML tags will be a non-capital letter. So, how do we compose components? Because in the end we will do composition of components. Inheritance is not recommended. A component, in this case a function, will return divs h1, h2, as we have seen up to now, but also another component. And this is just as easy as it seems. These are three welcome components with different params, different props. Okay? So remember that we will do composition of components, not inheritance. And what about one-way data binding, the one-way data flow? Well, in React, remember that they propose to erase the two-way data binding. How is the two-way data binding? Remember the model view controller, and in the two-way data binding, the model and the view are joined. When something changes in the view, the model is automatically updated, and when something changes in the model, the view is automatically updated. Double-way data binding. But when you have a very big application, you have many views and many models. They are joined all together. So in Facebook, they had a bug, a recurring bug in the notification panel, because many parts of the application modified it. They tried to solve it, but in a couple of months it was back. Why? Because there were no new views that modified, and it was like a race. It was a problem. That's why they invented React, and they proposed this unidirectional data flow. Okay? So the one-way data binding, that is what React proposes, is that the events flow up and the data flow down. Okay? We have our tree of components, and the data flow down and the events flow up. Does this sound familiar? It's just exactly as the DOM does. For example, in our application, we have the app component, the text input, the shopping list, and the item. So the app is the one that will render the text input, for example, with a default value that will be passed as a prop. The shopping list that will receive the number of items and the content of the items. And the shopping list will render 3 items. Each one of them will receive what do they have to render, this text. Okay, so the data comes from the applications to the different components. Remember here also the composition of components. And what happens when the user clicks on one of these items or in the text input? The component will tell his parent that something happened, and he will do anything else, and the parent to the parent. And in the app, we will make the changes needed in the state, in the data, and the data will flow down again. So the event doesn't modify the data and spread all over the components. The event flow up here and then to the application. The application modifies whatever is needed, and the data will flow down again. So data flow down and events flow up. Data flow down and events flow up. This is the one-way data binding, and this is also a way to do things that grow than scale, and that can be also easily tested. Okay? Thank you for getting here, and see you in the next video.